That's right. Okay. But this is the tell of Babel. You know, you've got this construction project up and going. We're gonna make something of this, and it falls into a holding pattern. And we move to the second flow of that. So there's the sort of the first movement of the story comes to right there where we've got this timeout in the construction. We move to verses 5 and 7. And now we have in verses 5 to 7, but the Lord came down to see the city. And look at verse 7. Come, let us go down. And so now we've got God using the same word that's been referenced here. And why did God come down?
I was just thinking, is that one of the places in the Bible, it seems like in Genesis most of the time God's kind of there. It seems like here God isn't there, then he has to come there.
That's pretty good, Bob.
Also refers to himself as us. It's got kind of a first reference to him.
Oh, it does have that. Of course, that's a great Old Testament argument, because there's two different, at least two different understandings. People like me just run all over to the Trinitarian understanding. Here's the implication and allusion to the Trinity all right there. But I learned what's called the plural of majesty. That when God is so great, the King is so great, you just have to use plural around the King. And I go, oh. I like Trinity better. Well, it could be the plural of majesty. I go, oh. And because it's so cool to have a Trinitarian reference there, but it might be the plural of majesty. But in any case, you've got this thing happening, and what's interesting is, do any of you remember the prophets of Baal story, Elijah and the prophets of Baal, and where Elijah challenges them to a shooting match? You have your gods start the fire, and you do however you want to do that. And so the prophets of Baal start calling on God to show up and set this wood pile on fire. And Elijah is not a very Christian guy. And Elijah says, "Why don't you shout louder? Maybe your God can't hear you." And so they go, "Okay, pardon me." Yeah, that's right. And so Elijah, of course, who's this great saint, and you just love him, but he goes, he might be busy. He may be napping. So just, turn on the alarm clock here. Let this going. So it is sort of the nanny boo thing. And but here we see it in the 11th chapter, the strong possibility that the notion is that God came down, and in that sort of Babylonian mythology sort of understanding am I hearing what they just said right? They want to be somebody, and so it's put the new batteries in the hearing aid, and come down and check this thing out. I don't believe that's the case at all. But it is to answer that sort of response. This is, to be honest, a satirical act by God. It's like mocking one's feeble achievements. This is it. This is the best you've got. An asphalt, pile of rocks here. This is it. This is how you're going to be somebody. And remember, these stories are being told for us to understand what's going on. And this would sound like my dad talking to me. I'm really going to be something. And I can hear me, yeah, sure. Why don't you just go make your bed? That sort of stuff. Yeah, that's right. Okay.
Do you think the fact that God was not present amongst this group is because these people were not willing to hear him or to even acknowledge his presence?
Tammy, I don't know if you heard Tammy's comment, but the fact that God is not present. And by the way, that's one of the issues throughout Genesis 1 through 11, the whole notion of God's presence, that we begin to see a significant change in the 12th chapter. So that's possible. I mean, that might be some possible data there. I'm not entirely sure that's the primary reason, though. But there is clearly a notion that God sees the future of this empty undertaking. That's a significant issue. God says, I see where you're going with this. And this is not in a good direction. It's not that God's condemning building a pile of rocks or a tower or a Dubai skyscraper. That's not the issue. But God responds because God sees down the road where we're going with this. And unity is in this case, for vanity's sake. It's not for the well-being of the culture. Unity is for vanity's sake. God sees it as a feeble achievement, as an empty undertaking, and the goal is self-aggrandizement and self-indulgence. It's not for some higher noble purpose. And God responds. The vanity is exposed, and the outcome is that understanding is gone and separation ensues. Which brings us to the third movement of the story, verses 8 and 9. And we're told about Babel. By the way, Babel sounds, you realize that puns work in English, and they're actually a crass, low form of humor. I try to tell Robert Bibby that all the time and ask him to repent of it. But Babel, the word, and remember, this is not an English word. It's brought over to our language in ancient Hebrew. But the word Babel sounds like a Hebrew word, Balal, which means God confused. So it's the Tower of God confusing. That's the pun they're hearing in Hebrew. We don't get it because it's transliterated over into English. But it's also a play on words on Babylon, which is, so you got lots of stuff, lots of possibilities. Babili, which is this the whole concept, as if to say, we are going to be somebody, we are going to make something. And Babili is to say, no, you're going to be confused. Because you are confused. So even in the words, you get these meanings that are sort of playing as puns through the story. Babel has become a symbol of a godless society. A society operating on, we don't need anybody or anything, dedicated to human vanity and self-indulgence.